Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is Daniel McAdams. And Daniel, good to see you today.
Good morning, Dr. Paul.
Well, very good. We're going to do something a little differently today. I understand there have been some viewers who have tweeted in some questions, and we're going to do a little session called Ask Ron Paul.
That's right.
So you have all the questions, and I'm supposed to come up with all the answers. So what kind of questions do we have?
Yeah, you are in the hot seat. The first question is coming to us from Jesse Miller. Do you think there's any value in pushing our liberal friends toward more non-interventionist politicians like Tulsi Gabbard?
Boy, absolutely. I mean, that's the name of the game. That's what I spend a lifetime doing, pushing and pulling and dragging, because I want to deal in philosophy, and I don't like the partisanship of the two parties, because unfortunately, I've complained so much that the two parties have a similar foreign policy. But I always welcome somebody I can agree with that may come from the other party, like a Dennis Kucinich and others, and we work with them. So Tulsi is just great. And there's a couple other Democrats, people who like that foreign policy, and they're decent liberals and progressives. It's worth working for. So when you have the opportunity, it's sort of a judgment call. When do you do this? If you happen to have somebody you're distributable, some that would reason, here's the idea. This has worked against us because the ideology of almost everybody in Congress has been established by our educational system. And take, for instance, Keynesian economics. You know, both sides endorse it. So what we want to do is push everybody into understanding why non-intervention foreign policy is good. So it's not so much converting the Republican Party to these views or the Democrat Party, or the same way with the Federal Reserve. You can get bipartisanship on all these issues. So anytime there's an opportunity and you see somebody doing well, I have a habit of calling people, and expressing, my support when they do something or cast a good vote, but they might not be a Republican. And I've done that, and a lot of times it's amazing. They're like human beings, and they deeply appreciate it. And I've had on occasion that was the opening event that I moving party and some in the Democrat Party, that if you're working on, say, foreign policy, you might as well forget them. I don't think it's likely that I'll be calling, Lindsey Graham and say, hey, Lindsey, why don't you consider this? They're beyond that. But there's a lot of young people and people with more open minds, and they're more serious. And I think you should do everything possible to bring people together ideologically rather than pushing people apart for partisan reasons.
Good. The second question that we have is about NATO. If we can put it up. This is from Nate. And he says, what should the U.S. do about NATO, especially if member nations continue to not meet their military spending requirements?
Yeah, this is interesting, but this is, I can give you a pretty short answer on this one. I think we should be out of NATO. We don't have to do anything about NATO other than take away our support, which has been suggested, by our president, that we shouldn't do that. But the billing of other countries, I don't think that's going to work. NATO is set up and they have their rules for all of a sudden to say, okay, we're going to do such and such, but we're going to run the show like we always do. We run all the military, and we're going to send a bill to these various countries. Sort of like sending a bill to Mexico, going to pay for the wall. It just doesn't happen. But we should have never joined NATO. And Mr. Republican Robert Taft, after World War II, he says, don't do this. This will lead to trouble. This will lead to our involvement in things that we shouldn't be involved in. Look at the bogging down in the Middle East and what we're doing in Eastern Europe and wherever we've been ever since World War II. So he was absolutely right. It qualifies as an entangling alliance, and we lose a bit of sovereignty under this, and we shouldn't have joined. And if we just get out, NATO might be, a European event or something, but let them worry about it. But I do not believe it helps our national defense. It doesn't help our security. It exposes us. It costs us a lot of money, and it contributes to our financial problems. So get out of NATO, and let NATO decide what they want to do with NATO.
Okay, and the next two we're going to combine because they're both about the issue of education, the education department. The first one, if we can put it up, is from Twitch. What do you think about a bill that's been proposed to abolish the education department? I think that's the Thomas Massey bill that we've been reading about. And the second one, could you explain school choice and why it's important for those who oppose the idea?
Okay, yes, Thomas Massey's introduced a bill to get rid of the Department of Education. He's absolutely correct constitutionally. Ronald Reagan did well by advocating that in 1980 election. But nothing was ever done, and probably nothing is going to get done. Just think of this debate for, appointing a new Secretary of Education right now. There was no real consideration. She was attacked because she wasn't loyal enough to really building up the Department of Education. So, yes, we don't need it. Matter of fact, there's no authority for the federal government to be involved in education. And that's the way it should be. And I don't think there's much evidence, since it was probably in the late 70s when the department was established. But even Eisenhower started HEW, Health, Education, and Welfare. And so we've been involved for a good bit. But the quality of education goes down. But it's interesting, there's still some people who will come to this country for good education. At the same time, average people, the middle class, or especially the poor people, for various reasons, cultural reasons and everything else, they don't even get education. They end up they can graduate from high school and not even know who the president is. And so it's a total disaster. So people come along and they say, well, the answer is choice. Yeah, I think choice is, but I don't think the choices of saying that you have this massive government system and you have a choice maybe on getting out of it and having these special schools that were quasi-private. I think it's good, and I don't like vouchers. I would like tax credits. So anything you could that seems to get somebody out of that system seems okay, but it's not the answer at all, because we shouldn't be involved in it. And ultimately, the most protection we can expect today is to maintain the legality of parents having the right to get their kids out of public schools and government schools. The whole thing is, it's very expensive. It's expensive for the school you get into, and you still have to pay your school taxes, and you don't get anything. So the only way I would have been supportive of the idea that if you do take your kids out and you assume your responsibility like it used to be, that you could deduct it from your taxes. And when you read history, and especially around the time of our founders, they frequently mention in their history, they were homeschooled, and they read the classics, and they were well educated. There were universities, but they were mostly taught at home or in very, very small groups. And that's what has to be legal. You have to have the legal right to get out. In the early 1980s, especially in Texas and around the country, they were attacking this, and they were trying to force everybody into it. And I think no matter what we think about of the bad things going on, we always, in medical care or whether it's education, we should have the legal right to at least get out. That's not really legalizing the Constitution, but it's offering an opportunity to people get out. But anything is prohibited, like the Obamacare, you're prohibited, you must join, or you get penalized, and education should be that way. So I would say it should be a parental responsibility and a local responsibility. There's no constitutional prohibition against local government schools, and they've been around, for a long time. But I still think the real choice, I strongly believe the real choice should be with the parents, and they could pick homeschooling or private schooling or whatever. And I think that is crucial to our survival, because right now we have the government school system, K through 12. At the same time, we have universities that are always on government contracts, and they get government grants. You have many hundreds of economic professors who get grants, from the government and from the Federal Reserve. Mm-hmm. And guess what? They publish papers that are very supportive of the Federal Reserve System. So it's a messy, messy system that people would say, whoa, what you're suggesting is that poor people would not have any education. But even in this little town that we live in, there's tremendous support from our chemical companies. You know, we have chemical companies in our area, Dow Chemical being the biggest, and they support our local colleges and everything, which is not all private, but they're basically private, and they contribute a whole lot. There'd be a lot of people that would contribute to better education, and it wouldn't become bureaucratic. You wouldn't have the bureaucrats from Washington. You wouldn't have, well, how are we going to argue over what books we're going to use, and what kind of cultural education we have, and what about all this this dictation on political correctness? None of that would exist. But we need some correction if we want to have enough support from the people, because I believe, just like so many things going to happen financially, this school system is going to fail. But we need more people getting the right kind of education. So choice is the proper word, but it's a little bit more than just a choice for a few people being able to leave the public school system and go over and get an education at another school. I think it's more than that.
Okay, and let's wrap it up with our final question. And this is from Kiara Robles. And she says, why advocate open borders after ending the welfare state if terrorism is a legitimate concern?
Well, you know, it's a good question, because it involves where are we in the state of our understanding of liberty. You know, the most ideal thing in the world would be that everybody are decent people and they trade with people and they're not violent people, and borders would be less important. They said in the latter part of the 19th century, you could travel any place in the world and you didn't have to have visas, and they probably didn't even have passports, and it was a lot different. But under today's condition, I think their concern is correct. It is an age where you should have some border protection. I believe in that. But I think it has to be done very carefully. And we've talked about the programs. About all the open border. Understand, it would be a wonderful idea. Because the founders faced this type of question. Because if you read the Declaration very carefully, they don't talk about the United States as a singular. It was the United States are, you know. And what they wanted, because it wasn't working well, you know, after the Declaration of Independence, because there were trade problems and they had some questions about defense. But the biggest thing was trade and travel and monetary. So they had the convention, which turned into which produced a constitution which became much more centralized than was intended. But in the meantime, they wanted to deal with the monetary issue, so they said only gold and silver could be legal tender. But that, of course, was thrown out after a time, and then later on, then they said free trade is good. And, you know, the fact that we can go to any state that we want is wonderful. But culturally, we were different, and it worked out well. That's idealism. But under these circumstances today, we want free trade to break down the barriers, but we would always assume that we're going to require some border protection and border inspection. But we have to do this with a little bit of common sense and not use the shotgun approach to do this and violate.
Well, I want to thank all of you for putting in.
Come back soon.